Hello, name's Sita. I'm trying to do an audiobook. This is inspired by Ozone, who made a bunch of audiobooks of his own, of the Vesper Frights books and the other books, up to the Tales from the Pizzaplex series. He hasn't uploaded the next set of books, the Nexie stories, so I thought I could try myself to upload one of the audiobooks, an audiobook of my own, simply because it seemed like a lot of fun whenever I'm listening to his. And I thought I'd give it a shot myself, though I'm not exactly, not very good at talking a lot or reading. So it's kind of new for me. But I thought, at the very least, it's good practice to get in, trying to read an entire book and make it understandable, bearable, hopefully. So, yeah, I thought I'd try that. And, well, if this version is no good, just, I guess, wait a few more days, weeks, until Ozone uploads his version of the Nexie books, audiobooks, or just buy the official audiobook. That's probably the best bet if you want a good experience. Well, without further ado, let me get into it.
What do you want with one of those crazy things?
Astrid's grandpa asked. His big, warm hand rested on Astrid's shoulder. He was leaning over her.
Nothing but trouble. Animated toys,
he said. He shook his head and his beard tickled her forehead. Pressed against the side of the neon-lit archway leading to the Pizzaplex Buddytronics boutique, Astrid didn't shift her gaze from the rows and rows and rows of doll and plush animal parts lining the walls of the build-your-own toy store. At least a dozen kids, some of whom Astrid recognized as classmates from her school, darted from one part of the chaotic and colorful shop to the other. They were all chattering excitedly. Some of the kids were pointing at various parts and describing what they were going to create, and some of them were showing off their finished toys. A fast-paced pop song blasted from the store's speakers, and several kids were dancing with their new Buddytronics. Astrid's gaze flitted from one Buddytronic to the next. All of the toys looked so huggable, although they could talk and move because they had animatronic endoskeletons and processors under their plush exterior. They hung limply and sweetly when they were idle. They were like floppy teddy bears or ragdolls when held in the arms of their owners. Astrid so wanted to have her own Buddytronic to hug. Astrid looked away from the finished toys and returned her attention to the rest of the shop. In the front of the shelf, stuffed with parts, a long assembly line style machine was set up. Once you picked out the features you wanted for your toy, a clerk placed the parts in the machine and programmed it. A large computer screen above the machine displayed an image of what the toy would look like once it was done. And if approved, the machine churned into action. Its metal arms picked up the various parts and put them into place as the under construction toy moved along a conveyor belt. Under construction? Nah. Coincidence, I think. It's giving big Poppy playtime vibes here. Anyway, several Pizzaplex employees attended to the machine. Right now, one of the girls from Astrid's school, Gina, a pretty girl, and she knew it, with long, shiny black hair, was loudly ordering around a curly-haired clerk. Gina pointed at the assembly machine's display screen.
I want his eyes to be brighter green.
You should have picked out brighter green. What? Gina commanded. As was typical for her, Gina stood with her hands on her hips, one foot jutted out and tapped the floor. Gina always wanted what she wanted the second she wanted it. Astrid watched the clerk tap a few keys on the machine's control panel and swap out some parts. The display screen flashed an image of Funtime Foxy Bodytronic that Gina wanted. With the brighter green eyes now in place, she turned her attention to the mouth. Gina screeched, Bigger teeth? Why the fuck would you want that? Sorry. The clerk scrambled to adjust the machine yet again. Astrid heard her grandfather sigh.
Kids your age never know how good they have it, he said
Softly.
Always wanting something else. Always wanting something else.
Softly. How do you do? Whatever. Astrid heard her grandfather's... Sorry? Astrid felt her shoulders tighten. For the last couple of weeks, Astrid had been bugging her grandfather, her farfar, the Swedish... Oh, Swedish. I don't know Swedish accent. I'm sorry. The Swedish name for grandpa, to give her more chores to do so she could earn some extra money. When he'd asked her what she wanted for the money for, she shrugged and said, "Oh, just things. Bigger teeth, you know." In spite of his mistrust of modern
thingamajigs,
Farfar was supportive of her interest in computers and programming. Even so, she knew how he felt about the animatronics at the Pizzaplex. She couldn't bring herself to tell him that she wanted to buy a Bodytronic. Ever since she'd started 4th grade, Astrid had been watching her classmates show off their Bodytronic pals. The animated toys were really, really neat. They were almost like having your very own best friend without having one you could take anywhere. They were toys, yes, but they were close to the size of a small child, about 2.5 to 3 feet tall. They could move around and walk, a little awkwardly. They also could talk to you. They didn't just say the same silly lines over and over. They were programmed to respond to what you said to them, at least in a basic kind of way. A ChatGPT then. Since Astrid didn't have a best friend, or any friend really, she desperately wanted the Bodytronic. The trouble was that a Bodytronic cost $1,000. Whew, steep, okay, but I guess for a high-tech thing. That was a lot of money, unlike Astrid's classmates who came from rich families that gave them whatever they wanted. Astrid didn't have a rich family. No friends, no rich family. Astrid didn't fit. Astrid had always felt different from other kids, but she used to at least have a couple friends. She'd met Brooke and Jolie in 1st grade when she and her dad had moved here to live with Farfar. Even though they were normal little girls who liked to play house and had parents who bought them all the latest toys and clothes, they'd accepted Astrid. Didn't understand why playing house was fun because all the things Brooke and Jolie pretended to do, Astrid actually did to help her dad and Farfar, and all her toys and clothes were handmade. Brooke and Jolie thought that was amusing, but they didn't ever make fun of Astrid for it. After 2nd grade, though, Brooke had moved away and Astrid left public school and drifted apart from Jolie. When they didn't have class together. Now she was the scholarship kid at an expensive private school. She had won free tuition when she took 1st place in a math and programming competition. You go, girl. The teachers were nice, but the kids there definitely thought she was a weirdo. Astrid tried to make friends, but she didn't know how to seem normal. Astrid was much smarter than the other kids in her class. She didn't think like them, or act like them, or dress like them. How could she? Stuck with an old-fashioned name, She had been raised by an old-fashioned dad and an old-fashioned grandfather. Dad and Farfar were carpenters, and they made the money-building Swedish-style furniture by hand. They did nearly everything by hand, too. Everything else by hand, too. They grew their own fruits and vegetables and beans and grains and raised their own cows for milk and cheese. That's too many hands. They built their own machines, fixed them when they broke. They even made their own clothes, and Astrid's clothes too. Clothes that didn't look anything like the ones her classmates wore. Craftsmanship is our heritage. A craftsman's life is a good life. Swedish. Like a PewDiePie? No, I don't think he has an accent. Not a very heavy one, anyway. Anyway, try my best. That might have been true, but she wished he wasn't a craftsman who had to travel all over to sell his work. He was gone more than he was home, and Astrid's Farfar was the one she lived with most of the time. Astrid loved her Farfar, but he believed in the old ways. He didn't like the modern society. She had no idea how to make him understand just how much she longed to be part of. That same society he was very wary of. Astrid's mother, who might have saved Astrid from being the weird girl in the weird clothes, wasn't around. She'd left when Astrid had been really little. She'd moved across the country to become a model, something that Astrid's dad hadn't approved of and wouldn't let her do. Astrid barely remembered her mum, but she had a single picture, blonde and blue-eyed with a almost doll-like face. Astrid's mum was beautiful. Astrid's dad said that Astrid looked like her mum. She guessed, and she guessed she did, except she got her dad's wide forehead and large ears.
"Come on, kiddo,"
Astrid's Farfar said. Astrid blinked and realized she'd let her mind wander. She turned and smiled at Farfar. Dressed in a hand-sewn grey flannel shirt and baggy dungarees, Astrid's Farfar looked as easygoing as he was. Astrid thought her Farfar had one of the kindest and best faces in the world, round and carved with the deep smile lines. Her Farfar's face was dominated by blue eyes, a big nose that bent slightly to the left, and a wide mouth that was usually upturned in a friendly smile. Astrid didn't think her Farfar looked like a Farfar. If it hadn't been for his curly grey hair and full but neatly trimmed grey beard, he could have passed for much younger than his age. Her Farfar smiled back and ruffled her short hair.
"Those skee-ball machines are waiting for us," he said.
Not very old-fashioned of you, is it? No, it probably is. It's probably the oldest machines in a place like that. Anyway, Astrid felt a surge of love and appreciation for her sweet-faced Farfar. Even though he didn't like the Pizzaplex, he brought her here for when he could find time for it. Astrid was thankful that he loved playing skee-ball. That was how she'd talk him into coming to the big entertainment complex the first time.
Takes me back to when I was a boy and the carnival came to town,"
her father always said when they played. Skee-ball, he liked to say, was the only real game in the Pizzaplex arcade. But after they played skee-ball, he always let Astrid choose another game to play. Astrid took his hand. "Can we get pizza after we play Farfar?" Her father creased the same wide forehead he'd passed down to his son and granddaughter. Right. He pursed his thick lips and pretended he was thinking hard. He winked at Astrid.
"With green peppers?" he asked.
"What else is there?"
Astrid responded. She giggled. What? A pizza with only green peppers? There is more, Astrid. Oh, well, I don't want to judge. Her father squeezed her hand. They walked away from the Bodytronics boutique. As they went, however, Astrid glanced back over her shoulder. One way or the other, she decided she was going to get her own Bodytronic pal. Even though you could feel his neck flush as Astrid walked past his desk, Remy stretched out his legs and slouched. He pushed aside his DJ Music Man Bodytronic as if he was bored out of his mind. And actually, Remy was bored with the Bodytronic. Like the rest of his classmates, Remy had thought Bodytronics were pretty awesome when they'd come out, but they were getting kind of tiring now. He could only do so much with them, and after a few weeks of messing with the Bodytronic, Remy didn't have much use for it anymore. But everyone was still bringing their Bodytronics to school, so Remy did too. No one knew that Remy liked Astrid, and no one was going to either. Remy was one of the... I messed up. One of the most popular kids in their class. His dad was the richest man in the county, maybe even the state. His family, as his mother frequently reminded Remy, had obligations and an image. Remy had to live up to both. Liking the class weirdo was not the way to do that. Remy watched Astrid stand by the whiteboard at the front of the wood-paneled classroom. It was oral report day. They'd each had to write a story about reaching a goal, and they had to read the story aloud in front of the class. Remy had already read his story about getting his horse to jump the fallen log across one of the trails on his family's estate. It had gotten a lot of laughs, which had been his real goal. Ooh, a comedian. For the 100th time, Remy asked himself why he was the one who could see that Astrid was cool. For today, for instance, Astrid was dressed in an ankle-length yellow cotton dress with a big collar that looked like the crocheted things his grandma put on the arms of overstuffed chairs. A floppy beret-like orange knitted hat perched on top of her hair and slouched over one of her bright blue eyes. Even though Remy sometimes tried to imagine Astrid in the regular clothes the other girls in his class wore, he thought that Astrid might not have been as appealing as she dressed normally. What? So he's just into the clothes? Something about her old-timey clothes was kind of rad. Okay. And odd clothes or not, Astrid, in Remy's opinion, was the prettiest girl in the school. She looked like a princess in a fairy tale, and Remy secretly wanted to be her prince. Although she had long arms and legs, she had a small torso. It was almost doll-like. For some reason, her small torso made Astrid seem kind of weak looking. Remy thought it was like she needed a prince to look after her. She didn't act like that though. Astrid wasn't anything like some of the crybaby girls in the class. Even if Astrid hadn't been as pretty as he thought she was, Remy still would have liked her. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way Astrid moved. It was possible that she could have had warts and worn a paper bag, and she would would have nonetheless been drawn to her. Unlike the other girls Remy knew, Astrid never acted like she was putting on a show to get attention. She never seemed self-conscious. She didn't flash fake smiles or strike poses. Remy had no doubt that Astrid was exactly what she appeared to be, a smart girl who was happy in her own skin. Oddly, that was another reason the other kids didn't like Astrid. She was so comfortable with herself that she raised her hand and spoke up in class all the time. She always had the right answers. Other kids said she was a know-it-all. Remy didn't see her that way at all. He just saw her brilliant and confident. He saw her as perfectly one of a kind, making sure he kept his gaze lazily directed towards one of the tall, paned windows that looked out at the rolling green lawn outside their school. Remy listened intently to every word of Astrid's story. He had to work to keep his face blank because Astrid's story was smart and amusing. It was about a girl who was trying to earn enough money to buy an expensive necklace. Using using economics concepts that probably no one besides Remy, maybe one other person in the class, Johnny, Remy's best friend, who was as smart as Astrid and almost as rich as Remy. Astrid described an earning plan that combined hard work with clever psychological manipulation. Is she manipulating her far? No, right? Yeah. In the middle of Astrid's story, Hugo, the class troublemaker, made a deliberately loud snoring sound. Everyone laughed because it was so funny. So funny, wow. And Warren, the class bully, shot a spitball at Astrid. Remy risked a look at Astrid as the spitball landed on her collar. He put his hand over his mouth to hide his grin when she casually flicked the spitball away with enough force to rocket it towards Camilla's left ear. Camilla, one of the popular girls who was way too full of herself, her best friend was Gina, who we already met, who had to be the most stuck-up girl on the planet, squealed and glared at Astrid. Astrid's words didn't falter at all. She just kept reading her story. I'm not sure what I did was right, though. Astrid read. My father said that when we're desperate for something, it's probably something we shouldn't have. Huh, that's deep. What's a farfar? Remy's friend Brett called from the other side of the room. Astrid looked up from her printed story. Her steady gaze found Brett. Farfar is the Swedish word for grandpa, she explains. Too bad you're not far, far away. Man, this is a comedy class. Camilla whispered loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Everyone laughed, and they clapped, and they got off the airplane. Great. Camilla, Miss Maelstrom snapped. She glared at the rest of the class. Camilla shrugged. The laughs died down into muffled chuckles. Astrid finished her story. The stick-thin ponytailed Miss Hallström stood. Well done, Astrid, Miss Hallström said. She smiled her crooked-toothed smile at Astrid. The class erupted in noisy boos. Feeling like a world-class jerk, Remy joined in. I guess you don't want to be left out, okay? Weird. Image trumped what was right. Oh, right. Image. Blah. He'd learned that from his dad. But even as he booed, Remy kept his sideways gaze on Astrid. Her head held high, Astrid returned to her seat at the back of the room, while Miss Hallström pounded on her desk and shouted for everyone to settle down. As dusk settled over the far two-story farmhouse, Astrid sat on the patchwork quilt that covered her twin-size bed. Her savings were spread out across the red and yellow cotton squares. She'd counted them 3 times, and it wasn't even close to enough. Astrid sighed and gazed out the open window. The branches of the massive oak were heavy with new leaves. They fluttered in the stiff breeze that crept into Astrid's room and made the hems of her turquoise curtains dance. The breeze carried in a sweet scent of her lilac. Her farfar grew along the borders of the garden. Astrid looked around her cozy room with its yellow pale walls covered with hand-woven tapestries, framed cross-stitched and embroidered, flowers, pretty watercolors, and pastels of trees and lakes. Everything on her walls had been made for her by some member of her extended family, none of whom lived nearby, but all of whom made sure to remember her on her birthday and Christmas. She let her gaze linger on the shelves stuffed full of wood and stone-carved animals. Her aunts and uncles and cousins made dozens, and she loved them all. Not for the first time, Astrid thought about how lucky she was to live in such a pretty place. After Astrid's mom had left, but before Astrid and her dad had come to live with Farfar, they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in concrete complex, right at the edge of the industrial part of the city. She'd hated that. It had been so noisy and crowded, so grey and dingy, so cold. She much preferred the green that surrounded her Farfar's house. She loved that all she could hear on a night like this was the sound of birds twittering in the bushes below her window and the occasional moo coming from the pastures out behind the house. But no matter how much she liked her home, Astrid wasn't fully happy. She was too frustrated to be happy. For the last month, ever since she'd watched Gina order up her bodytronic, Astrid had been working every spare minute to earn the money she needed for her own. But the kind of chores she could do weren't big earners, and she didn't have enough hours in the day to make that much cash. With her birthday coming up, Astrid had told her father and her dad that she wanted money instead of gift, but from the look they'd exchanged, she could tell they'd already made something for her. So she'd quickly added, "But whatever you give me will be great." Aww. Even though Astrid had relatives who cared for her about her from afar, she had her dad and Farfar. Astrid was alone most of the time. She was okay with her own company because she had plenty to keep her busy. She had her chores around the farm and she spent hours on her computer. Sometimes, however, Astrid really missed having friends. If she'd had friends, she could have invited them to birthday parties and asked for money instead of gifts. At school, she'd heard Camilla tell Gina that Camilla was going to do that so she could buy a pair of sweet boots. Sweet boots! Her parents refused to get her. If Astrid had invited everyone to a birthday celebration, they wouldn't have come, much less brought money, but that didn't mean Astrid couldn't use the idea. Even though Astrid had no friends and had never had a birthday party, Astrid's aunts and uncles always sent her presents. She thought that if she was careful about how she asked, she might be able to get them to send money instead. So a couple weeks before her birthday, Astrid sat down and wrote friendly notes to her relatives. "Give me money." In the notes, she explained that she was learning about money and how to invest it at school, and it would be very helpful to have enough money to invest so she could do well in her school project. She felt a little bad about lying, but not horribly so. She did want to invest in a bodytronic. Yes, invest in your happiness. It's important. And she was doing a school project. Not totally related, but okay. Fitting in by having a bodytronic. Astrid's plan might have worked if she'd had a normal family. Unfortunately, most of her aunts and uncles were on her dad's side of the family. They were the Farfar sons and daughters, and Farfar had raised his sons and daughters to take pride in handmade items. Cash wasn't a handmade item, so Astrid received her usual knitted sweaters, carved animals for her collection, and hand-sewn dresses. As predicted, Astrid's dad and Farfar presented her with what he and her dads had made for her. A big new desk for her bedroom. The oak wood they'd used had probably cost more than the amount of money she still needed to come up with. And she'd had to hide her frustration when she saw the massive corner desk that admittedly fit perfectly in her room between her dresser and her shelves. Presents from previous birthdays. She pretended like the desk was the best thing in the world. No way she was going to hurt her Farfar's feelings. Aw. Astrid did score some cash though. A couple of aunts and on her mom's side of the family sent money, probably because Astrid's aunts felt guilty about how their sister had abandoned Astrid. They sent $100 bills. That brought Astrid's total to just $120 shy of what she needed. It was close, but it wasn't close enough, which was why Astrid burst into tears when she was blowing out the candles on her chocolate cake Farfar had baked. Her dad was on the road and couldn't make it back in time for her birthday. Astrid and her Farfar sat together at a small maple table that was placed precisely in the center of a burgundy and cream braided rug that had been made by Farfar's wife, Astrid's Farmore, who'd passed away a couple of years before Astrid was born. Her Farfar prized pendulum wall clock, which hung on a green painted wall covered with family pictures, ticked away the seconds.
"What in the Sam Hill?"
Farfar said when Astrid swiped at her white face. Astrid's Farfar went pale, as if he'd done something terribly wrong.
"Is it the cake?"
I don't know what accent I'm going for, he asked.
"You don't like chocolate anymore?"
The cake is great,
Astrid said, but her voice shook. Her Farfar raised an eyebrow.
Really?
Astrid said.
It's not the cake.
"It's the desk,"
her Farfar said.
"You don't like it?"
No,
Astrid cried.
I mean, yes, I love the desk.
She sniffed.
"Then what?"
Astrid shook her head. How could she explain that she wanted and why she wanted it? Her Farfar tucked on his beard the way he did when he was trying to solve a problem. He pushed aside the cake and leaned towards Astrid.
"Tell me, kiddo, how much money do you have you saved up for that fancy dancy doll you want?"
"Huh, figure it all out, huh?" Astrid's eyes widened.
How did you know that? Or how did you know?
Her Farfar smiled, then reached out and patted her hand. He didn't answer her question.
I'm $120 short of what I need,
Astrid said.
Well, I just so happen to have $120 tucked away for a rainy day.
Astrid's Farfar glanced out the window.
Or for a not-so-rainy day, as it so happens, he chuckled. Ha, 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 ha.
No, that's not how you chuckle, is it? Oh, whatever. Astrid smiled. Then she frowned.
But you think dolls are...
Her Farfar waved a hand.
I may not understand all the computery stuff you like so much, but I do understand the idea of liking what you like. When I was your age, all I wanted to do was build furniture, and my papa thought anything that didn't have to do with farming was a wasted time. I had to fight him tooth and nail to get to do what I wanted to do. I promised I'd never do that to my own kids. Your dad and your aunts and uncles got to choose what they loved, and they get to choose, and you get to choose as well. If what you want is a computerized doll thingamajig thingy, that's what you should have.
Astrid's father stood.
Let's go to the Pizzaplex and get you a Buddytron.
A bunnytronic. A buddytronic. Astrid connected automatically.
Yes, that.
Astrid's far held out his hand. Oh, sweet so far. Always interesting how these stories end, because sometimes they just go really nicely, or sometimes they just start really gruesomely or like badly. So far, this is really reminding me of which one? It's a story that starts really nicely, but then goes bad. I guess The Cliffs, kind of. Well, well, it starts bad, but then it goes better, and then it goes bad again, right? So I guess it's not the same. This is just, well, it's similar. It's bad in the beginning, but she doesn't get what she wants, and now she gets what she wants. Well, we'll see if she gets what she wants.
What in tarnation?
Is he Southern after all? Who says tarnation? I guess he would have picked up some things. Anyway, Astrid's grandfather said when he and Astrid joined the throng clogging the main walkway that circled the interior of the Pizzaplex. Astrid gasped as a red-shirted Pizzaplex employee tore past her and nearly locked her down. Her father caught her and put a protective arm around her shoulders. As usual, the Pizzaplex was filled with a bunch of noises that sounded like they were at war with one another. Rock music from stages clashed with the tinny music and pings and beeps from the games. The whoosh of the overhead roller coaster went against the roar of the cars in Roxy's raceway, and kids' squeals competed with the adult laughter. Tonight, though, there was something more intense about all the sounds. Or was it that there was a new sound? Astrid thought she could make out, just beyond the rest of the clamor, a high-pitched squeal. It was like the feedback sound that came out of a microphone sometimes. Something weird is going on, Astrid said.
Seems so.
Her father guided her to the edge of the black and white tiled concourse.
Let's stay over here, out of the way.
He frowned at the wildness around him, but he said,
Now, which way to your doll buddy?
Astrid pointed past the castle that rose up under the big stained glass ceiling that was in the middle of the Pizzaplex roof. It wasn't a real castle, it was a theater, but it looked the way castles look in fairy tales. Astrid's farfar kept his arm around her as they began weaving through the thick crowd. As they went, all the neon lights at the entrance of the stores and the various rides and game areas started blinking. For an instant, the lit-up branches of the big, fat storyteller's tree near the theater went completely dark. Interesting. Something weird is going on. So is this when the storyteller's acting up? Must be after the director and the other guy get locked in the storyteller tree, right? So did the tree's roots, the snake-like LEDs that meandered away from the tree, seemingly reaching into every part of the Pizzaplex. As quickly as they went out, the lights came back on. But then other lights flickered. Astrid and her Farfar passed the main dining room. Its overhead lights went out, and the light and lit up again. Another Pizzaplex employee dashed past Astrid. This time, she pressed close to her Farfar and she avoided being bumped. They were getting close to the Bodytronics boutique now. They just had to get past another couple stores. The crowd was even bigger here. Astrid craned her neck to see through the people. Her Farfar kept her moving, and in seconds they were in front of the Bodytronics boutique. Astrid forgot all about the boy in the glass dome. She let go of her Farfar's hand and started to dart into the boutique. What? Boy in the glass dome. Glass dome. Huh? Anyway. A clerk, a tall, brown-haired guy with eyes that were really close together, stepped out in front of her and held up a hand. Sorry, you can't come in. I think we're closing. No, Astrid wailed. She couldn't help herself. She'd been so excited, so close to getting her Bodytronic.
You think you're closing?
Astrid's Farfar asked. He planted himself in front of the brown-haired guy.
If you're not sure, then how about you stay open long enough for my granddaughter to get her bought buddy?
Astrid blushed, but she didn't correct her Farfar. Another clerk, a curly-haired man, strode around the Bodytronics assembly machine, and she and her male clerk exchanged glance. I think we need to shut it down, the woman said. She reached for the black metal accordion grating that was pushed back on either side of the entrance. You sure? The male clerk asked. Maybe... He shrugged. The woman shrugged too. I'm running a diagnostic, but I think it's best. She started to pull out the metal grating. Astrid's Farfar took a step and braced his hands against the grating. Stiff-armed, he kept the red-headed clerk from pulling the grating closed. Why can't you just let us in before you close? Astrid's Farfar asked. Just one more body to make, huh? When you can close up and go home if you want. The woman shook her head, and she didn't try to pull on the grating. It's not that we're trying to get off early, sir. It's just that we're not sure what's going on with the lights and stuff. Everything's twitchy. It's probably best that we close. You can come back tomorrow. Astrid shook her head. She had really strong feeling that if they left, her father would change his mind. She could tell by the way he was squinting at the shelves and pots that he was having second thoughts about helping her get her Bodytronic. Please, Farfar, Astrid whispered. As he heard her over the racket filling the Pizzaplex, Astrid didn't. How he heard her over the racket filling the Pizzaplex, Astrid didn't know, but apparently he did. Or maybe he just knew what she wanted. He looked at the redhead's name tag.
Karen, he said. Can I call you Karen?
Karen smiled. Sure. Astrid's father gave Karen one of the biggest smiles as he gestured at Astrid.
Today is my granddaughter's birthday. She just turned 9.
She's just 9? I thought she was like 12 maybe. Anyway, Karen flicked a glance at Astrid. Happy birthday, she said. Thank you. Astrid tried to look both friendly and pathetic at the same time. And what my granddaughter wants for her birthday more than anything, Astrid's father continued, is one of those buddy things you have here. I'm not all that hot on animatronic contraptions, but my granddaughter is a good girl and she deserves to have what she wants. You don't want to ruin a good girl's birthday, do you? Karen looked at the mail clerks. His name tag said his name too was with Vince. Astrid's father looked at Vince too. How about you, Vince? Astrid's father asked. You want to ruin this little girl's birthday? Way to guilt trip them. Astrid's father patted Astrid's head like she was a toddler. Astrid clasped her hands together. She opened her eyes wide, pleading. Good team, huh? Karen and Vince exchanged another glance as the overhead lights sputtered. Karen shrugged. You'd better make it quick, she said to Astrid. Karen gestured for Astrid and her father to enter the boutique when Karen pulled grating close behind them. Go ahead and pick out what you want, Karen said. We'll see if the program takes. Astrid immediately dashed around the assembly machine and ran down the length of parts shelves. She knew what she wanted. She had a perfect vision of it in her mind, so she chose her parts quickly. She started with long blonde braids. I want 3 of those, and I want them to be woven together, so it's like braided hair. A braided braid. A braided braid, huh? Okay. Karen was following Astrid with an electronic tablet. She typed in Astrid's instructions. Astrid pointed at the round blue eyes. I want those eyes. She pointed at an upturned nose. That nose? She pointed at rosy, pouting lips, not that different from her own. Those lips with even white teeth, not big teeth like those. She frowned and scanned the teeth. More like those. She pointed at smaller teeth. Then she hurried on down the row. She spotted 4 pink cheeks. She gestured at them. Those cheeks, please. Astrid went from one set of features to the next, until she picked out all the elements she would create a face that looked very much like her mother's. Then she hurried over to the clothing sections of the boutique. She pointed at the simple blue dress with a little flounce around its hem and a darker blue bow around its waist. In front, below the waistline, the dress had big patch pockets in the same black blue as the bow. That dress, please, Astrid said. She spotted a straw hat with a white brim and a blue bow that would match the dress, and that hat. Got it, Karen said, and typing. And how about the body? Karen pointed at the doll torso's arms and legs. Astrid thought the separate parts were a little creepy, so she just looked at Karen. I'd like the doll to be tall and slender. Whatever parts work for that will be good. Karen nodded and typed some more. Is that it? She asked. Astrid looked over at her Farfar. He gave her a thumbs up. She smiled and nodded. Yes, that's it, she said. The overhead lights went wonky again. Astrid looked up and chewed on the inside of her lips. Please stay on, she begged the electricity silently. The lights came on full again. Karen stepped over to the Bodytronics assembly machine and quickly typed in Astrid's instructions. Okay, Karen said, gesturing at the machine screen. Is this what you had in mind? Astrid looked at the screen. She clapped her hands. That's perfect, she said. The image on the screen looked like a doll version of Astrid's mother. It was perfect. She's beautiful, Astrid said. I'm going to call her Nexie. Okay. That's a nice name, Karen said. She smiled. All right, then. Let's get Lexie built. She tapped a few keys on the machine's control panel. Astrid heard a droning sound inside the machine. Something clunked, and then the machine arms started reaching out to grab parts off the shelves. Astrid, mesmerized by the image on the machine screen, didn't pay much attention to what the machine was doing as it built her bodytronic. Neither did Karen, Vince, or Farfar. Karen and Vince were huddled together, talking quietly. Astrid's Farfar was looking out. Through the closed metal grating, he was watching the commotion near the glass dome. From under construction, I guess. Right. Probably. Astrid didn't take her gaze from the image on the screen until the conveyor belt's hum got louder and she heard a clink, and thump. Was her bodytronic complete? Astrid trotted over to the end of the conveyor belt. She reached it just as Karen lifted Astrid's bodytronic. Oh. Karen blew out a loud breath and looked at Astrid. I'm really sorry, Karen said. Astrid frowned. Why? Karen twisted her lips and turned Astrid's bodytronic around so Astrid could see the doll from the front. The system must have been glitching worse than we thought. She dropped the bodytronic into the metal platform at the end of the conveyor belt. The doll landed on the back and her arms and legs in the air. Her gaze was pointed at the ceiling. Astrid stared at the bodytronic. She felt her father step up behind her.
What in the heck is that?
Farfar asked. Astrid pressed her lips together. She blinked several times. I won't cry, she told herself, but she wanted to. Her beautiful bodytronic. She thought about the way her bodytronic would look for weeks. Every time she looked at her mother's photo, she'd imagined seeing those features on her very own bodytronic. It was going to be like having her mother back again. Only this time, her mother would want to be with her because bodytronics were designed to be loyal to their owners. But this wasn't anything like her mother. Astrid's Farfar pointed at the bodytronic.
We're not paying for that.
Of course not, sir. What I'll do is... Astrid didn't hear the rest of what Karen said. It sounded like a storm was raging inside Astrid's head. Her ears were filled with whooshing sound. Astrid's heart was pounding too. She felt a little nauseated, but she couldn't look away from her bodytronic. All the parts she'd picked out were there, she realized, as she studied the blonde-haired doll, but they were in really awful ways. The blue eyes, for instance, weren't placed right. One was much higher than the other, and the lower eyeball stuck out as if it was about to pop out of the doll's face. The plump cheeks were there, but they were low on the face, so they looked more like jowls. The pouty mouth and the upturned nose were there, but they were too close together. The mouth was practically resting on the upper lip of the mouth. The mouth didn't seem to want to close properly. This made it look like the doll was baring teeth, like it was getting ready to snarl at any moment. The face, as a whole, looked like something Dr. Frankenstein might have created. And just like Dr. Frankenstein, you do not love this doll that you have created. What a nice parallel. And then there was the hair. The machine had given the doll the braids that Astrid wanted, but the braids were originated at the base of the doll's skull instead of at the top. They jutted upwards and then knotted together and sprayed outward like a big blonde spider. The braids were so wild they almost seemed alive. The doll's proportions were all wrong too. The doll's head was too small for her nearly 3-foot tall body, and the nice long arms and legs were placed strangely. The arms jutted from the doll's sides instead off from normal shoulders, and the legs seemed to start at the doll's waist. Right next to where the arms started, the doll's neck was too long and its chest was too compacted. Because of its too small head and odd body, the doll's clothes fit poorly. The hat sat low on the doll's forehead, and the dress was scrunched up and wrinkled. It was stretched nearly to ripping at the shoulders. The bodytronic was really hard to look at. It was beyond ugly. Really, the thing was more monster than doll. That's a little mean, right? I mean, come on. Didn't do anything. It's not a monster. Astrid's father took her hand.
Come on, kiddo. That's not what you wanted. Let's get out of here.
He pulled gently, attempting to draw Astrid away from the horrible thing in front of her. Astrid, however, didn't move.
Astrid, honey,
her father said gently. Out of the corner of her eye, Astrid watched her father turn to face Karen.
She's traumatized, he said. I'm going to want to speak to her supervisor.
Well, gonna get them fired after they let you in? That'd be fucked up. Nah, well, Astrid shook her head. No, father, it's okay. Astrid took a step forward. She touched the doll's short-fingered hand. You really don't have to take this doll, Karen said. You can come back when we get the system repaired. We'll make you a good one. A good one, Astrid thought. What made something good or bad? Was it the way something looked? Astrid's mom was really pretty, but she'd abandoned Astrid. Was that good? The bodytronic was supposed to be like Astrid's mom. If Astrid refused it, wasn't she really just refusing her mom? Wasn't she doing exactly what her mom did? Walking away because things weren't the way she wanted them to be? A couple of years before, Astrid had overheard her dad talking to her father. They were talking about her, and her dad had used the word accident. Was Astrid an accident? What if she was? For sure, she was different. She didn't fit in, but she didn't deserve to be rejected. And neither did this doll. It's okay, Astrid said. I'll take her. What? Karen said, cried out loud. Astrid felt her father's hand on her shoulder. She looked up at his bunched brows expression. For reasons she didn't understand, Astrid felt tears fill her eyes. When they escaped and started running down her cheeks, her father reached out and brushed the droplets away with a calloused thumb. He studied Astrid's face for a few seconds. Then he turned to Karen. He gestured at the doll. Astrid's father asked,
Is it safe? Are the problems just with its appearance, or will its function be a mess too?
Karen looked at the doll. She curled her upper lip a little. Astrid knew Karen was disgusted by the doll. Karen scrunched up her nose and took a deep breath and leaned over the doll. She reached behind the doll's neck. Astrid heard a click, and the doll sat up. The doll's eyelids lowered and raised again. Then the doll's blue eyes brightened almost to a glow. The doll looked around, and its gaze landed on Astrid. Hello, the doll said. My name is Nexie. What is your name? In addition to all the physical problems, the machine had messed up the doll's name too, but that didn't matter. Close enough, right? As soon as the doll spoke, Astrid's hesitation about the doll disappeared entirely. She felt an instant connection with Nexie, as if they'd been friends forever. Hi, Astrid said. My name is Astrid. Something inside Nexie's too small head hummed, as Nexie's eyes unfocused for a few seconds. Then Nexie widened her tiny mouth into what was probably meant to be a smile, but looked more like a grimace.
Astrid,
Nexie repeated in a flat, robotic voice that didn't sound at all like a girl's voice.
the name Astrid comes from the Swedish name Astrior. It means divinely beautiful, because it combines the Norse words for God and beautiful. The name Astrid has been a Scandinavian royal name since the 10th century.
Well, I'll be,
Astrid's father said, raising his unruly eyebrows at the doll.
I got that right.
She, Astrid said.
Nexie is Sid. Nexie is a she.
It didn't matter what Nexie didn't sound like a girl. She was a girl. Hell yeah. Except Astrid looked at Karen. I didn't know that dolls were programmed to have facts like that. Karen frowned at Nexie. They're not supposed to. Something like that. Then opened and closed her mouth. She shrugged. The programming of bodytronics is updated regularly, is all I can say. Right. What else does she do?
Oh, sorry, my voice got a little high there.
Astrid looked at Nexie. Can you walk, Nexie? She asked. Nexie immediately stood and she began moving down the conveyor belt. Her gait was awkward, more of a lurch than a walk. But she took long strides and covered a lot of distance quickly. Ah, great. That's what you want. A creepy machine that is quick. Then she turned and came back. When she stopped, she held out her strangely placed arms. Astrid immediately picked up her new doll. When Nexie draped her arms around Astrid's shoulder, Astrid smiled. Well,
I guess we'll take her after all,
Astrid's farfar said. 5 minutes later, Astrid, her farfar, and Nexie were walking down the concourse, heading towards the Pizzaplex exit. Rather than feeling self-conscious about her odd-looking bodytronic, Astrid realized she was proud to have such a unique new friend. It didn't bother her at all when people turned to watch her and Nexie walked by. As they moved through the packed crowds in the Pizzaplex, Astrid noticed that cheers were erupting from near the glass dome. When she turned to look that way, Nexie turned as well. Astrid joined the copycat movement. It made her love Nexie even more. So far, really sweet, actually. I like that. The next day, Astrid walked to school. She felt like her feet weren't touching the ground. It seemed like she was floating on a billowy cloud. She couldn't remember ever being so excited to be going to school. It was because she wasn't going alone. She had Nexie with her. Really taking that doll to school, huh? This is not gonna end well. Because the day was unusually cool and drizzly, Astrid wore her rain parka. She kept Nexie tucked under the waxed gray canvas until she got to her locker. When she took off her coat, she sat Nexie on the beige laminate floor. Nexie immediately stood and began looking around. As she turned, the doll's braids, if you can call them braids, who knows, flopped around her. The night before, Astrid had removed Nexie's hat. It was just too big to stay on, since the weird braids stuck all around Nexie's head.
"You gross," a boy cried out. "What is that thing?"
At first, Astrid ignored him. She usually tuned out what was going on around her at school. The other kids never spoke to her. Then someone kicked Nexie.
Ow!
Nexie said. Astrid scooped Nexie up and spun her face. Whoever had hurt her doll, she found herself looking into the small dark eyes of Warren, who'd hit her with a spitball the other day. His squared-faced taunt. He was holding his own Montgomery Gator, Buddytronic. Of course he has one of those. And he was pointing at Nexie.
Look at this piece of crap doll,
Warren shouted. His high voice bounced off the 9 years old, of course. Bounced off the grey metal lockers and carried all the way down the hall. A couple dozen kids, most of whom held Buddytronics of their own, turned to stare at Astrid and Nexie. Astrid started to rotate Nexie so her back was to the other kids, but Warren reached out and grabbed Nexie's arm. He yanked Nexie from Astrid's grip. Warren held Nexie up and sneered at her.
"This is the ugliest thing I've ever seen,"
Warren said.
"Even uglier than you, Astrid."
Warren said Astrid's name the way he always did, drawing it out and making it sound like something nasty.
"Give her back, please,"
Astrid said. She stood on her tiptoes and reached for Nexie. Warren lifted Nexie above his head. He was taller and larger than Astrid and all the other kids at their school, and he held Nexie mockingly above his head.
"Look at that face,"
he sneered. He poked at Nexie's bulging eyeball.
"It's like something from outer space. You should talk. Like your face is any better."
Astrid immediately pressed her lips together. She didn't normally talk to people that way. Astrid tried to retrieve her Buddytronic, but Warren backstepped and held Nexie out of reach. The other kids in the hall clustered around Warren. They all stared at Nexie. So did their Buddytronics. Astrid spotted Camilla and Gina, who were pointing at Nexie and laughing. Gina's Funtime Foxy Buddytronic and Camilla's Circus Baby Buddytronic were laughing too. Behind the girls, green-eyed, blonde Remy, who Astrid thought was the cutest boy in the class, stood with his skinny, auburn-haired best friend Johnny. Remy was frowning, and then he glanced at Astrid. He immediately looked away, as if he couldn't stand looking at her. Warren shook Nexie really hard. Her misplaced arms and legs flopped around her, and her braids flew into a tangle. Gina cried out,
"Oh, seriously, that's too creepy. That thing looks just like Astrid."
Camilla crowed. When she laughed her witch-like laugh. Is that good? No, of course it's not. And everyone else joined in. Astrid couldn't take it anymore. She had to protect her friend, her new friend.
"Stop it,"
Astrid screamed. She rushed at Warren and kicked him in the shin.
Hey!
Hey! Warren shouted. His face turned red and he dropped Nexie and started toward Astrid.
What's going on here?
A deep voice boomed. Warren froze, but he glared hard at Astrid. Ignoring Warren, Astrid bent down and picked up Nexie. The other kids in the hall skirted away as Mr. Mullins, the school principal, came striding down the hall, a huge man with wide shoulders and trunk-like legs. Mr. Mullins wasn't nearly as scary as he looked, unless he was angry. And Astrid could tell from his narrowed eyes and flushed face that Mr. Mullins was angry. Mr. Mullins reached Astrid and Warren just as Warren started to turn and trot away. Mr. Mullins, muscle bulging in his wide jaw, grabbed Warren by the back of his orange t-shirt.
Not so fast, Mr. Price,
Mr. Mullins said.
You.
He turned and pointed at Astrid.
And you, Miss Erickson, are going to join me in my office for a little chat.
"But
Astrid began.
But nothing, Mr. Mullins said. I saw you kick Mr. Price. Very unlike you, Miss Erickson. I'll need an explanation.
Mr. Mullen let go of Warren's collar and gave him a gentle shove to get him moving down the hall.
I'll admit that Mr. Price can be more than a little trying, Miss Erickson, he continued. But this school has a no-tolerance policy for violence of any kind.
But, Astrid tried again.
We'll sort this out in my office,
Mr. Mullen said. Astrid switched on her small bedside lamp. The bulb's glow turned the lamp's wooden tripod legs golden. Astrid's farfar had made the lamp, of course. For several seconds she looked at it, letting its familiarity soothe her. It had been a very long day, and it had been a very bad day. Yeah, could have told you that. Even though Astrid had explained to Mr. Mullins why she'd kicked Warren, Mr. Mullins had called Farfar, her dad, was still out of town, and Astrid had received a demerit on her record. Damn, Warren had gotten a day's suspension from school for bullying, but no demerit? I guess not. With that kind of policy, makes sense. Even if it's not fair. Who knows? Astrid didn't think that was fair. Neither do I. She knew that a day off from school was no punishment for Warren. No, that's for sure. The rest of the day, Astrid had been forced to listen, without complaint, to her classmates' mean comments about Nexie, and she'd had to put up with the snickers and the pointing fingers. When she'd gotten home, Astrid's farfar had suggested that maybe Astrid should return Nexie. Astrid had immediately cried out, "No!" Instead of turning Astrid against the bodytronic, all the cruel and attention Nexie had gotten made Astrid feel even more loyal to the doll. Nexie needed someone to love her and accept her as she was. Astrid was going to be that someone. Oh, lovely. Astrid sat down on the edge of the bed. She turned to look at Nexie, who was perched on Astrid's pillow. "I'm really sorry you were treated so badly," Astrid said. Nothing is your fault," Nexie said. "They did not like me because I am ugly." "You're not ugly," Astrid cried. "Yes, I am ugly," Nexie said. This reminds me of something. Wasn't there a story like that? Not to be beautiful. Was it in Bobby Dots? I can't remember. Oh well. "The big boy said, 'You are ugly too. We can be ugly together.'" "I'm not ugly," Astrid said. "Warren says that just to try to make me cry." Astrid might not have fit in with the other kids at school, but that didn't mean something was wrong with her. She knew that. Her father had made sure she understood it. People like that. People like things that are different. People don't like things that are different than what they're used to, Astrid's father had explained the first time a kid at school had made fun of Astrid's clothes. And then they don't like things, they can be mean. And when they don't like things, they can be mean about it. But that doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with them. If you took... I guess the grandfather's saying that.
"If you to look in your heart, you'll always know the truth of who you are."
Astrid had looked, and she knew. She knew she was Astrid, just Astrid. She was happy with herself. She wanted Nexie to be happy with herself too. Astrid scooched back in her bed, She tucked her legs under her and turned to face Nexie. Just because you look different doesn't mean you're ugly, Astrid told Nexie. As she said the words, Astrid felt a little twist in her stomach. Because she was lying a little bit, Astrid remembered thinking that Nexie was ugly when Astrid had first seen her, but Nexie didn't need to know that.
Your name means beautiful,
Nexie said.
Everyone should match their name.
So what does Nexie mean? Astrid couldn't believe Nexie said things like that. In just the one day that Astrid had been with Nexie, Astrid had learned that Nexie was almost like a real person when it came to the things she said. She was way more advanced than the other bodytronics Astrid had seen. The other kids at school had could only say a few words here and there, and most of the words were very simple. Even though Astrid knew her father loved her very much, her father was still her father. He was a busy man who was working on his farm or his business nearly every minute of the day. He spent time with her as often as he could, but he'd never be a friend or a playmate. Nexie could be both of those things. Astrid scooted over to sit next to Nexie. Do you want me to read a book to you? She asked. Nexie stretched her lips into her version of a smile.
Yes, please read.
Astrid was in the middle of a thick fantasy book, so she explained to Nexie the story's plot and described the characters. Then she pulled her quilt up over her and Nexie and read until her eyes were droopy enough for sleep. Astrid set the book next to her nightstand and got up to put on her PJs. Nexie stayed where she was, but she followed Astrid with her gaze.
Everyone would like me if I was not ugly,
Nexie said, as Astrid put her dress in her dirty clothes hamper. Astrid turned to look at Nexie. In the story, the people liked Princess Sunshine after she changed the way she ruled, Nexie said. Oh, Nexie said that.
When we change things that people do not like, they can like us.
Yeah, change yourself for other people. I guess you can do that. Astrid frowned and returned to the bed. She said, then reached out and took Nexie's short-fingered hand. Nexie curled those fingers around Astrid's own. Nexie's skin, made of a thin, almost fabric-like, super smooth plastic, was cool in Astrid's grip. That's not really true, Astrid said. When we like ourselves, others will like us for who we are.
But no one likes you.
Jesus Christ, Nexie. Nexie said. Astrid let go of Nexie's hands. The words had felt sharp, like a slap. Astrid shook her head. Not everyone likes everyone else. It's how the world works. Nexie seemed to think about this. Then she said,
But when you are ugly, it's harder to be liked.
Well, you're not wrong, but is it right? Astrid opened her mouth to deny what Nexie said, but Nexie kept talking.
My arms and legs are in the wrong places, she said, but can help me change the things that are wrong. You just need the right parts. Could you please help me fix what is wrong?
It's like a reverse To Be Beautiful, huh? Could be. Let's hope not, because that would be gruesome. Astrid started to shake her head, but Nexie's gaze was steady, filled with pleading. Astrid couldn't just dismiss the doll's request. I might be able to fix your arms and legs, Astrid said. She'd already been thinking about that. She'd helped her father with enough project that she was sure she could figure out how to reposition Nexie's arms and legs if she had the right parts. Maybe she'd get them. Because Nexie had turned out wonky, Karen had sold Nexie to Astrid and her father on behalf for half the price. Astrid's father had let her keep the $120 he'd been intending to put towards the Buddytronic too. It's part of your birthday present, he had explained. That meant Astrid had almost $500 left. She could probably buy at least some of the parts she needed with that much money. Other things need fixing, Nexie said. Like what? Astrid asked. The torso needs to be longer, Nexie said. No one likes a short torso, Astrid frowned. How could she get Nexie a longer torso? That part would be too expensive to buy. The face should be fixed too, Nexie said. The eyes should be farther apart and bigger. The nose and mouth are too small, the cheeks are too round, and the hair is messy. Hair should be smooth and tidy. Astrid couldn't help herself. She laughed. Okay, she said. One thing at a time. Let's see if I can get what I need to move your arms and legs first. Nexie cocked her head. Her blue eyes scanned Astrid's face with intent focus. Astrid leaned towards and hugged her doll. We'll get you fixed up, she said. Together, Nexie said. We are connected. Astrid pulled back from Nexie and smiled at her. Yes, we are, Astrid said. Buddytronics were still super popular, but Remy had stopped bringing his to school. When his friends asked him why, he told them his parents had made him stop because he'd lost the Buddytronics 3 times. That he lost it that many times was true, but his parents didn't even know about that. He was just tired of carrying it around. That's fair. I mean, they're really tall and they must be heavy too, right? He wished everyone else would get tired of Buddytronics too, especially Astrid. Ever since Astrid had shown up at school with her wildly creepy doll, she'd been under fire, even more than usual. What Astrid was doing was so bizarre. Remy couldn't decide whether to feel sorry for the girl he liked or be mad at her for being so dumb. Why would anyone who already didn't fit in because of the way she dressed and acted want to start bringing a freaky doll to school? Sure, it was a Buddytronic, but it was a Buddytronic that looked like it belonged in a post-nuclear world. The thing made Remy's skin crawl. He could barely stand to look at it. But whenever he wanted to look at Astrid, which was often, he always ended up seeing that doll too. Seeing the doll too. Is that foreshadowing? I hope not. Remy stood at his locker, a few feet down from Astrid's. He pretended to mess with the zipper on his backpack as he watched Astrid approach her locker and set her doll on the floor next to her feet. While Astrid concentrated on her lock combination, Remy admired the way Astrid's dark green dress made her pale skin seem to almost glow. He thought about how he wished he could walk over to her and tell her he was impressed with the way she solved the hard math problem on the blackboard this morning. He wanted to tell her he thought it was cool that she figured out the math, even though Warren and a couple of his idiot friends kept firing spitballs at her. And he wanted to tell her he thought she was the nicest girl in the world because when Gina deliberately tripped Astrid as she headed back to her desk, it was Astrid who had apologized when she fell into Camilla. Seriously, Astrid was way too sweet for her own good. That much may be true, yeah. He really wanted to say that to her. As Remy dismissed that idea as being sure to ruin his social standing, his gaze dropped far enough to land on the doll. That's when he realized the doll was staring at him. At first, Remy thought that the doll was just positioned so that it looked like it was staring at him. But the longer he looked at the doll, particularly at the doll's jutting out eyeball. He had to accept that the doll was absolutely and for sure staring at him. And not just was the doll staring at Remy, it was staring at him with total and complete hatred. Hatred? Why? He didn't do anything, did he? That's weird. Remy's back smacked up against his open metal locker as he jerked backwards, involuntarily recoiling from the force of the doll's creepy glare. Almost, because that's what it was, a glare. Remy couldn't have said why he knew the doll's gaze was very, very unfriendly, but he did know it. In spite of the doll's sickening, scrunched-up features and poked-out eyeballs, the doll's face had managed to arrange itself into a cross between a sneer and an I think you're slimier than a slug expression. When he realized how strongly he'd reacted to the doll's gaze, Remy pretended it hadn't happened. His hand shaking just a little, but no one saw. He zipped his backpack closed and he slammed his locker shut. When the metallic clang echoed down the hall, he flicked his gaze towards the doll, intending to reassure himself that he'd just lost his mind there for a second and had read all kinds of stupid stuff into a dumb bodytronic's mindless gaze. But then Remy returned his attention to Astrid's doll. He nearly screamed. He managed to contain the scream, but he couldn't stop himself from gasping. The doll, still staring at him, had raised a middle finger. No. And that finger was pointed right at Remy. It was like the doll was singling him out or calling him out. Remy felt challenged or threatened or both. And more than that, he felt scared, terrified, actually. Astrid's bodytronic, which was supposed to be a pretty basic animatronic doll, didn't like Remy at all. As strange as it sounded, Remy knew it was true. Astrid finished at her locker and she bent down to pick up a doll. Lifting the doll, Astrid noticed Remy. She raised one of her perfectly arched eyebrows, obviously wondering why he was staring at her. Remy quickly turned and strode away. As he did, he casually wiped away the sweat that was beading on his very clammy forehead. Astrid pushed open the door of the Pizzaplex animatronic parts shop. Small and cramped, not lit up at all like the rest of the Pizzaplex. The shop smelled of machine oil and shaved metal, but it was a fascinating place. It was filled with shelves, heavy with pistons and gears and servos and wires and metal skeletons pieces in nearly every shape and size. Astrid figured she'd be able to find what she needed to fix Nexie in here. But she'd have to do it quickly. Astrid had talked to her father into bringing her to the Pizzaplex so she could come to the shop, but she hadn't told him why she had wanted to come. He thought they were here to bowl and to have a pizza, while he stood in line to get a lane and rent their shoes. Astrid had said she wanted to go look at something in one of the shops. Well, she didn't lie, did she? I'll be back in 5 minutes, Father, she said. She really wanted that to be true. Can I help you, sweetie?
Can I help you, sweetie?
A woman's husky voice. What's a husky voice, anyway? That's good enough. Astrid looked back towards the metal counter that ran along the back of the shop. A broad-shouldered woman with short, graying black hair smiled at Astrid. Astrid figured the fastest way to find what she wanted was to ask. She trotted up to the counter and set Nexie on a gleaming silver surface. The woman, her name tag read Roberta, looked at Nexie. "Oh my," Roberta said. Yeah, that's a good husky voice, right? Oh well. Astrid used the comment to explain what she needed. As you can see, she said, I need to move my doll's arms and legs. I've looked at how they're attached and where they need to be, and I think this is what I need to make changes. Pulled out the lined piece of paper on which she'd written her list of tasks. She's 9 years old. How the fuck does she have the fucking planning, ability, management, and I don't know, probably even has the technical know-how how to do it. She really deserves that scholarship. Right, let's see. Astrid pulled out the lined piece of paper on which she'd written her list of parts. Roberta, her gaze locked on Nexie's bulging eye, took the paper. She looked down and scanned it. This looks just right. I don't know what to do with this voice, Roberta said. I can get all of this for you. Astrid shifted her feet and looked up at the red-rimmed Freddy Fazbear's clock above the shelf behind the corner. Can you do it really fast, please? She asked. I'm sorry, but I'm really in a hurry. My father, my grandpa, is waiting for me. Astrid gave the woman a bright smile. If you tell me where to look, I can help you. Well, aren't you a nice kid? She grinned at Astrid and stepped out from behind the counter. Come on, we'll get what you need and have a shake of a lamb's tail. What kind of saying is that? Astrid giggled. She hadn't heard that expression before, but she knew a lamb's tail couldn't shake really fast. You think? They're short tails. Why shouldn't they have a high frequency? Happy and excited, she followed Roberta down a narrow aisle. Astrid waited until after her father went to bed before she started working on Nexie. She knew that once her repairs were made, her father would always notice the changes, but once done, he wouldn't make her undo them. Why would he stop her from making changes? If she told him what she was going to do, however, he might have asked her how much the parts cost, and when she told him they cost all the money she had left, well, he could have said that was too expensive and might have made her return them. Luckily, Astrid's father was a very deep sleeper. As soon as she heard him snoring, she knew she'd be able to let herself into his workshop and use his tools to work on Nexie. Not very safe. I really wouldn't let a kid into a workshop. Oh well. Come on, Nexie, Astrid whispered as she picked up the bag of pie she'd bought and led her friend out of her room and down the long, wide hallway on the farmhouse second floor. Astrid's father always left one sconce burning in the hallway, and its glow reflected off the hall's polished oak floorboards. Astrid's leather-soled shoes made a soft tapping sound as she walked. Nexie's rubber-soled shoes made a faint squeaky sound. The two sounds blended like they were supposed to go together. That made Astrid smile. Once they'd gone down the stairs to the first floor, Astrid said, "You like Farfar's workshop. It smells like sawdust and sap, and a little like cinnamon, because he likes to snack to suck on cinnamon candies while he works." What does cinnamon smell like? Nexie asked. I am not able to smell things, Astrid cringed. I'm sorry, I forgot you can smell things. I shouldn't have said that. It is okay, Nexie said. I cannot taste things either, but I can see things. I like to see things. Astrid squeezed Nexie's hand. You're a really good sport, Astrid said. Thank you. I cannot do sport. They'd reached the enclosed breezeway that led to the workshop. Astrid hurriedly led Nexie past rows of coats and boots hanging neatly on brass hooks, and then she opened the workshop door. Astrid pulled on a thin string. A bare light bulb flashed on overhead. Bright yellow light filled the room. "Over here," Astrid said, leading the way to the cluttered work table. "Give me a second. I want to be able to put everything he has out back. Exactly where it was." Astrid looked at all the tools and wood pieces and memorized their position. Once she was sure she could set everything back right, she moved a few things and laid out her parts. Then she quickly gathered the tools she'd need. Nexie's arms and legs were attached to her torso with plug-like connectors. All Astrid was going to have to do was to remove the limbs, unscrew the connectors from their place near Nexie's waist, and then screw them on at the shoulders and hips where they were supposed to be. So Astrid grabbed a couple screwdrivers and a pair of pliers. Then when she was done, she lifted Nexie up onto the work table. "Okay," Nexie said. "Let's get you fixed up." Nexie said nothing as Astrid started to work. Astrid was a little bothered by Nexie's complete lack of enthusiasm for the project, but she decided to shrug off Nexie's blah attitude. Nexie was, after all, a programmed doll. She wouldn't be expected to have emotions like the enthusiasm and anticipation that Astrid felt about fixing Nexie's arms and legs. One of the things that Astrid had been concerned about when she started the project was how she was going to cut into Nexie's skin to move her limbs. But when she removed Nexie's dress, Astrid discovered Nexie's skin-like covering was really loose and pliable. Astrid was able to make tiny slits in plastic material and then remove and reposition the connecting plugs before reattaching Nexie's limbs. When she was done, Nexie's arms and legs were extending from her shoulders and hips. "There," Astrid said triumphantly. Nexie, her expression blank, looked down at her newly placed arms and legs. Astrid picked Nexie up and pulled her on the wood floor. Nexie began walking around. She moved more smoothly than she had before, but she continued to jerk as she walked. She looked terribly awkward. Sorry. Nexie looked up at Astrid. "Thank you for trying to help," Nexie said. "But a whole new body is needed." Nexie cocked her head. "The proportions are not right. You need to find the right skeleton to make things the way they should be." Astrid slumped down onto the wooden stool in front of her father's workbench. "I don't understand," Astrid said. "I thought you'd be happy with this." Astrid didn't like getting angry.
"Anger never solves anything," her father had taught her.
No matter what the kids at school did, Astrid didn't get angry with them. She just tried to stay out of their way. But Astrid was feeling angry now. Not really angry, just a little angry. Maybe she was just hurt. She felt like Nexie didn't appreciate all the money Astrid had spent, all the work she'd just done. Astrid ran her hands through her hair. Standing, she picked up a push broom. She used it and a dustpan to sweep up the metal shavings her project had created. She created metal shavings. She's 9 years old. She fucking... Sorry. Like operating some machinery to create metal shavings. Like drilling holes. What else? She using a fucking sidewinder to cut beams into halves. Jesus. Scholarship people. Crazy. Where was I? Then she put all her father's tools and project pieces back where she'd found them. "I am happy to have a friend who wants to make improvements," Nexie said when Astrid finally returned and faced her.
Thank you for the improvements, but we have to cut off the skin and put it on a new skeleton. That is the only way to fix the problems.
It sounds like you're talking about a body swap or something, Astrid said. How would that even be possible? Astrid tried to imagine how she'd get Nexie's silk material skin stripped off Nexie's endoskeleton so it could be put on a different one. She couldn't see how it would work without totally destroying the material.
Like this,
Nexie said, climbing back onto the workbench. Nexie reached into one of the big patch pockets on her dress. She pulled out a pair of blunt-tipped toy scissors. Astrid frowned. Where did you get those? Astrid asked.
I found them. This is how it will work.
As Astrid looked down, her brows bunching tighter and tighter as she watched Nexie cut a circle around her waist. Once the plastic was cut, Nexie put down the scissors and used her opposite hand to pull the skin off her hand as if it was a glove. Nexie then scooted over to where the top of the broom handle rested against the workbench. She slipped the plastic glove over the handle.
See,
Nexie said.
Skin can be taken off and put onto something new. That is what we must do.
That sounds dangerous. Somehow. Or rather, I think she's going to extrapolate that to humans, which is going to be the danger in this book. While Astrid watched, Nexie removed her fabric hand cover from the broom handle and put it back on the metal hand. Astrid pressed her lips together, thinking hard. She really wanted to make Nexie happy, so she wanted to do what Nexie wanted her to do. But how was she going to get the new endoskeleton Nexie wanted? At school the next day, everyone noticed Nexie's changed arms and legs. Astrid couldn't miss the looks Nexie got during morning class. It was a warm, sunny day, so when lunchtime came, Astrid settled on a bench in the school's brick courtyard with Nexie to eat the cheese sandwich she'd made that morning. She loved warm days when she could eat outside. It was easier to be apart from the others there. She didn't have to eat alone at the table in the corner of the dining room. Somehow, being on a bench by herself was easier. As Astrid unwrapped her sandwich, Brett walked past.
Yo, dude,
He called out as he strolled by.
Nice work on the arms and legs.
Yeah, right, thanks. Astrid wasn't sure whether Brett was talking to her or Nexie, or maybe to someone else. But she didn't have a chance to respond. Gina and Camilla burst through the double doors from the dining room and walked out into the courtyard just as Brett spoke. Both girls were wearing new dresses as they were paused to pose so everyone could notice how pretty they were. When Gina and Camilla looked at Nexie and Camilla said, "As if," she rolled her eyes and nudged Gina. Gina laughed. "Yeah, that thing needs a lot more than fixed arms and legs." "Yeah," Camilla agreed. "Maybe it needs like a spa day." Camilla tittered and looked right at Astrid.
Or at least somebody does. Maybe a complete makeover.
Gina shook her head. "More like a facelift, or actually, it's more of a gut job, like that house my mom fixed up." "Oh no, a real estate person. Disgusting." Camilla's big brown eyes were open wide. All she kept was the beams and the floorboards, she said. "Exactly," Gina said. Gina and Camilla flounced towards Astrid. Gina deliberately stepped on Astrid's foot as she went past. "Oh, excuse me," Gina said in an obviously sarcastic tone. Gina and Camilla giggled as they sashayed across the courtyard. Astrid put her head down and bit into her sandwich. Nexie scooted closer to Astrid.
Those girls are not nice,
she said softly in her deep monotone.
But they are not wrong. A makeover would be good.
Nexie looked at Astrid, who continued to eat.
I have a picture of pretty girls in my database,
Nexie went on. I have
determined that certain ways of looking are better than others. Larger features, for instance, are prettier than small ones. Big eyes and wide mouths are better, and cheeks would show bone structure instead of being plump and round.
Astrid's hand lifted to her own cheeks. She knew Astrid was talking about Nexie's own face, but Astrid's features were the exact opposite of what Nexie was describing. Nexie had always been fine with how Astrid had always been fine with how she looked. Now, however, she began to wonder, what if her eyes and mouth looked bigger? God, is this gonna turn to be beautiful? No, surely not. Would that make her fit in better with the kids at school? The second she asked herself that question, Astrid snorted. What a stupid idea. How would she get different features? She knew from watching TV that makeup could help faces look different than they really were, but Astrid was too young to start wearing makeup. No, she was fine the way she was. Wasn't she? Sure she was. But Nexie? Yes, Nexie could use some more work. Her face didn't need to be fixed up. Maybe if Astrid could find a new endoskeleton for Nexie, Nexie's features could settle on the new skull in a way that looked prettier. Astrid nodded at herself. She really was going to have to figure out how to get Nexie a new endoskeleton. As soon as he stowed his book and grabbed his backpack, Remy joined the stream of kids heading towards the stairs leading to the school's first floor. He got there just as Astrid and her spooky doll did, and they were right behind Camilla and Gina. Remy brushed past the girls and started down the steps. Just as he did, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the doll suddenly fly out of Astrid's grasp and flop to the floor, right at Camilla's feet. Camilla, yakking with Gina, wasn't looking at her feet, of course. She tripped over the sprawled-out doll. Off balance, Camilla pitched forward toward the stair railing. Besides Remy, no one was close enough to stop Camilla's forward motion, and Remy was slow on the uptake. Still trying to process what he'd just seen, the doll really did just throw itself at Camilla's feet, right? He asked himself. Remy hesitated long enough that Camilla's stomach hit the railing and she started to flip over the rail headfirst. Remy's brain finally kicked in. He lunged to his left and managed to grab Camilla's neck as they started to go over the railing. Time seemed to compress as Remy hung on to Camilla's legs with both hands. As if from far away, he could hear Camilla screaming, "Somebody, help me!" Oh, well. Remy shouted. Suddenly, Johnny was there, and he grabbed Camilla's waist. Together, Remy and Johnny pulled Camilla back up over the railing. Camilla continued to scream, and now Gina joined her. Pointing at Astrid and wrapping a protective arm around Camilla, Gina screeched at Astrid, "You did that on purpose!" Astrid retrieved her doll from the floor, which had shrunk to the far side of the stairs. Astrid's face was stark white, her eyes looking glassy. She looked extremely guilty. She didn't protest when Gina started screaming at her. "You threw your doll at Camilla's feet to trip her!" Gina shrieked.
"What's going on here?" Mr. Mullen's voice roared.
Camilla's and Gina's screams. Over Camilla's and Gina's screams. "She tripped Camilla," Gina accused, once again pointing a finger at Astrid. "She tossed her doll on the floor so Camilla would trip over it." Mr. Mullins looked at Camilla.
"Are you hurt?"
Camilla stopped screaming. She rubbed her side and shrugged. Mr. Mullins ran a hand through his thinning hair. He looked at Astrid.
Did you throw your doll at her? Astrid, her face still pale and tight, shook her head. I don't know what happened. I didn't mean to drop her, she said. She didn't look very convincing. Her eyebrows were practically jittering. Remy had to speak up. I saw Astrid right before Camilla tripped, he said. She didn't throw her doll. It just fell. That was true mostly. And the rest of the truth, that Camilla's doll had thrown herself, was not something Remy was going to say out loud. All right, Mr. Moore said. Well, no harm, no foul. All of you, clear the stairs. Miss Palmer. He took Camilla's arm. Let's get you to the infirmary to make sure you're A-OK.
Remy watched Mr. Mullins lead Camilla away. Then he glanced at Astrid's doll. The doll lifted its chin and stared at Remy. It winked. Remy whirled away, ignoring the goosebumps that erupted on his arm. Winking? Why would it wink? Astrid walked home from school very, very slowly. That her legs worked at all was a miracle. Had she seen that she really thought that had she seen what she really thought she'd seen? Had Nexie really jumped out of Astrid's arms to trip Camilla? Why didn't you ask? Astrid looked down at her new friend. She wanted to say something. She wanted to ask if Nexie had done what Astrid thought she had done, but then again Astrid didn't want to ask, because she didn't want to know for sure. The thing was, she did know. But if she didn't ask, she could pretend that she didn't. If Nexie did trip Camilla, she had done it for Astrid, obviously. Camilla was a good friend. No, that's not. Nexie was a good friend. She wanted to protect Astrid and Camilla. And Camilla had been mean to Astrid at lunch. Nexie was just a doll, and she didn't understand the way the world worked. She didn't know that she couldn't react to mean words by trying to physically hurt someone. Nexie was just being protective in a not-so-good way, and Nexie was really sensitive to insults too, even the ones aimed at Astrid. It was all because Nexie felt so insecure about her looks, Astrid told herself. It was hard being the one who stood out and the one who looked different and acted different. No, Astrid concluded it wasn't Nexie's fault. The doll couldn't help it. Astrid had once heard one of her teachers describe the stuff Warren did as acting out. Astrid had looked up what that meant. Acting out, she learned, was a bad behavior that was a defense mechanism. She looked up that too. A defense mechanism was a way of thinking that was used without the person realizing it to avoid something like anxiety. When Astrid thought about it, she knew it made sense. Warren had a really scary dad. Astrid had seen the man yelling at Warren in the school parking lot. That meant Warren acted out to avoid the bad feelings he had about his dad, and maybe other things too. Now, Nexie was acting out. Nexie was anxious about how she looked, and she covered that up with her bad behavior. Astrid was responsible for Nexie. She created her, kind of, and brought her home. They were connected. It was up to Astrid to help Nexie so the doll didn't do more bad things. She would help Nexie get her new endoskeleton so Nexie could feel better about herself. Then everything would get better. There was just one problem with Astrid's plan to help Nexie. She didn't know how to get Nexie what she needed. After Astrid had did her chores, she sat down at the yellow kitchen counter in her father's bright, clean kitchen and used a white rotary wall phone to call the pot shop. With Nexie perched on a counter, leaning against the green ceramic cookie jar made by one of Astrid's aunts that held homemade ginger snaps Astrid and her father had made the night before. Astrid talked to Roberta,
Oh, sure, I remember you, Roberta said when Astrid had reminded Roberta of her visit. You're a nice girl. What can I help you with? Astrid explained that she wanted to get a new body and skull for Nexie. Roberta immediately made a clucking sound and sighed heavily in Astrid's ear. Oh, hon, I'm so sorry, but there's just no way to get your hands on a completed endoskeleton, Roberta said. Fazbear Entertainment keeps the whole enchilada under wrap, don't you know? The endoskeletons are available for company use only. What about the other shops? Astrid asked. Not Fazbear Entertainment ones. No such thing, Roberta said. Oh, sure. There's some rinky-dinky operations out there with a far more limited selection of parts than I have, and a few jerry-rigged animation skeletons, but they're junk compared to the ones that come out of Fazbear factories. The only way to get a real deal is to get it from Fazbear Entertainment facility. There's no way for you to do that. What about building one? Astrid asked. Do you have parts to do that? Roberta's sigh sounded like a gust of wind in Astrid's ear. I wish. Unfortunately, the only place that has all the parts needed for a complete endoskeleton is the Fazbear repair facility under the Pizzaplex. That's kept hush-hush too, top secret and all that. Astrid thanked Roberta and hung up the phone, and sighed even more heavily than Roberta had. Astrid reached around Nexie to lift the cookie jar lid and grab a ginger snap. She chomped onto it, taking out her frustration on the poor baked good. The aroma of ginger and cinnamon filled the kitchen. Will we get the new body now? Will we get the new body now? Nexie asked. Astrid sighed and shook her head. I don't know how to do it, Nexie. Roberta said the only way to get the right parts is to build a complete endoskeleton is from the robotics repair facility under the Pizzaplex. Then we will go there, Nexie said, as if it was the easiest thing to do in the world. Astrid made a face. Roberta said the face is top secret. Astrid put air quotes around the words. Nexie cocked her head and stared at Astrid's fingers. Then she looked at her own fingers. Long fingers are better than shorter ones, Nexie said. Astrid looked at her small fingers. She shrugged and continued talking. I've seen employees go into the areas in the Pizzaplex that are off limits to the public. They have key cards that get into those places. I don't have one of those. Astrid stood and helped Nexie off the counter. Together they left the kitchen and headed down the hallway towards Astrid's room. Maybe we should just give up on the idea of getting you a new body, Astrid said. You can find a way to get the parts, Nexie said. You are clever. That is true. Astrid frowned and thought about it. If she could get into the repair facility to get the parts, maybe Astrid could build a complete new endoskeleton. Maybe, but was it really necessary? Not if Nexie could learn to like herself as she was. You really don't need one, Astrid said. I think it's better to be yourself than try to be someone else, or like everyone else. Even as she said the words, Astrid felt like she was being what her father called two-faced. Hadn't she gotten Nexie because she was trying to be like the other kids who had bodytronics? Well, no, not really. She decided as she and Nexie walked to her room. She hadn't just bought Nexie to fit in. Astrid got Nexie so she'd have a pal to hang around with. Nexie walked jauntily across Astrid's multicolored rag, which two of her aunts had made for her the previous year. Nexie crawled up onto Astrid's bed and sat in the middle of it. Astrid studied Nexie and thought about what Nexie had done to Camilla. Because Astrid had finally accepted that Nexie had done it, Astrid walked to the bed and took Nexie's hand.
I saw what you did to Camilla, Nexie said. Astrid said. Nexie said nothing. Nexie, Astrid said, do you want your new body so you can get revenge on the mean kids at school? Nexie looked at Astrid for several long seconds. She cocked her head and then said, no. Astrid said, okay. She let go of Nexie's hand and stood. It is important to be the best you can be.
It is important to be the best you can be, Nexie said. That is right, yes.
Astrid sat back down again. Sure, she said.
Astrid means divinely beautiful,
Nexie said. I remember, Astrid said. That was the first thing you told me.
It is important to be beautiful, Nexie said. There has to be beauty.
Astrid looked at Nexie's strange, scrunched-up features, and Nexie's balloon-like eyeball and spider-like braids. When Astrid had first seen Nexie, she thought of Nexie as ugly. But now she just saw her friend, Nexie. And to Astrid, Nexie was beautiful. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Astrid said. She grinned and did air quotes again. That's another one of those things someone else said. Nexie blinked.
What does that mean?
She asked. Fafa explained it to me. He said it means that different things are beautiful to different people. It means, I think, you're beautiful the way you are. Nexie stared hard at Astrid, as if thinking about what Astrid said.
I know what I think is beautiful.
Astrid wasn't sure what that meant, but she said brightly, how about we just decide to be beautiful together? Will you do that for me? Don't say that. Together forever. That's not a good book. Not a good ending, anyway. I hope this one has a happy ending. Nexie stretched her lips into her version of a smile.
Everything I want to do is for you,
she said. Astrid leaned over and hugged Nexie. Then she stood. She had homework to do, so she started toward her desk. A knock on her door stopped her.
Hey, kiddo, are you decent?
Her father called through the door. Astrid, relieved to have solved Nexie's problem without having to build or find an endoskeleton, laughed. Come on in, Father. Astrid's door opened and the father walked in. His hands were behind his back.
I have a surprise for you.
Astrid tried to see what he was hiding. What is it? She asked.
Hey, no peeking, her father said. Close your eyes properly.
Astrid closed her eyes. She heard her father cross over to her bed. Her bed squeaked, and then she felt her father's hand on her shoulders. He turned her so she was facing the bed. Open your eyes, Astrid's father said. Astrid opened her eyes and her stomach clenched. But she quickly pasted on a smile and widened her eyes in a way that she hoped made her look delighted. Oh, Father, it's beautiful. Astrid wasn't lying. The surprise, a new bodytronic doll, which now sat on the bed next to Nexie. She was beautiful. It was the doll that Astrid had originally designed, exactly as she designed it. But Father, she said, you shouldn't have. Astrid's father chuckled.
Oh, don't worry. I didn't have to spend an arm and a leg on it. I was able to work out a dilly deal with the lady at the shop. She felt so bad about what happened with... He gestured towards Nexie. That she was happy to make you this new doll, Lexie. Like you wanted, for practically nothing.
Astrid's gaze went from Nexie to what Nexie was supposed to have been, the new bodytronic Lexie. You're the best, Farfar, Astrid said, with as much enthusiasm as she could manage, throwing her arms around him.
I'm glad you like it, kiddo, her father said.
returning her hug. As Astrid's farfar held her close, she inhaled the fresh scent of the homemade soap he used to clean up at the end of every one of his long days. Pressing her head against his chest, she felt the thump, thump, thump of his heart, and she felt his love. If only that love was enough. Astrid's farfar let her go and ruffled her hair.
I'll go get dinner started, he said. I'm glad you liked your surprise.
Oh, I do. Astrid watched her farfar to walk out the room. She smiled at him when he waved at her, and she closed the door. Astrid turned back towards the bed. Her mouth dropped open and she gasped. Astrid watched Nexie grasp the new bodytronic by its shoulders and sink her huge teeth into the doll's forehead. Okay. Nexie reared her head back and, with Lexie's plastic skin clamped in her teeth, ripped out the doll's face away from its metal skull. As its skin peeled off, the new bodytronic writhed. Its arms flailed. Astrid wanted to rush to the new doll's rescue, but she couldn't move. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The new bodytronic's blue eyeballs rolled across the bed and dropped silently onto the floor. The doll's small white teeth flew out of its now bare metal face. They sprinkled onto Astrid's quilt as Nexie grabbed the doll's braids and ripped them into little pieces that looked like tufts of fur. The blonde fur caught in the room's air current, flew up around Astrid's bed and scattered over the teeth. Nexie, Astrid wailed as she watched Nexie, using both her hands and her teeth now, strip the rest of the bodytronic skin off its endoskeleton. Nexie didn't seem to hear Astrid. She was skinning the doll so quickly it was as if she turned into a school of piranhas. Oh, some words are difficult to pronounce, aren't they? Even as she struggled to process Nexie's violent attack on the new bodytronic, Astrid took the doll's now bare endoskeleton and thought, well, now we have a new endoskeleton. But Nexie wasn't finished. Nexie grabbed the shoulders of the metal skeleton, gritted her teeth and pushed her hands together. Although the new doll continued to squirm, Nexie compressed the doll's endoskeleton and its processors. In a matter of seconds, the doll-shaped metal turned into little more than a bulging lump of scrap. Nexie grunted and compacted the metal even more. When she dropped what was left of the new bodytronic onto the floor, it landed with a thud before it rolled across Astrid's rug and came to rest next to her desk. Astrid was shaking so hard she grabbed her desk chair and to steady herself. She stared as Nexie casually brushed the rest of the doll's remains from her bed. Nexie sat back to the Astrid. God. Another break. So difficult to read for so long. Nexie sat back on Astrid's pillow and clasped her hands together calmly. Oh, Nexie. Astrid breathed. What did you do? Nexie looked at Astrid. Her eyes widened innocently. What do you mean? Astrid took a deep breath to steady herself. She was too scared to address Nexie's attack on the doll. So Astrid walked over and picked up the scrap metal that had, moments before, been a perfectly usable endoskeleton. She held it up. This could have been your new body, she said. Nexie's eyes narrowed. No, not that one. That one was wrong. Weird.
Hey, runt,
Warren called out to Astrid as she walked into her classroom the next morning. That dress is as ugly as you are. The rest of the kids traipsing into the classroom chuckled. Astrid blocked them out. She and Nexie went to the back of the room and sat down. She placed a book and notebook on the top of the dark wood desk and kept her head down, her gaze straight ahead. "Get your beady eyes off me," Warren said, "and tell your freaky doll to stop looking at me too." Warren held up his fingers and made a crisscross gesture. Astrid had seen the gesture in a movie. It was used to ward off evil. Miss Hallström strode into the room. "Settle down, everyone," she called out. Astrid lifted her chin even higher and focused on the teacher. As she attempted to concentrate on Miss Hallström's grammar lesson, Warren's voice echoed in her head. "Beady eyes, beady eyes, beady eyes." Did Astrid really have beady eyes? She'd never really thought about her own eyes that way before. She'd never thought much about any of her features, but with all Nexie's talk about being beautiful, about how some ways of looking are better than others, Astrid was starting to wonder about her own looks. Maybe her clothes, her smarts, weren't the only reason she didn't have friends. Maybe she didn't fit in because of how she looked. That thought kept Astrid occupied all day. So much so that she barely heard anything Miss Hallström said. When the end of the day bell rang, Astrid and Nexie were the last out of the classroom because Astrid was still distracted by her thoughts. As she headed towards the door, Miss Hallström called out, "Are you okay, Astrid?" Astrid blinked and turned. "What? What?" "I asked if you're okay," Miss Hallström said. "You've been quiet all day. You didn't raise your hand once." Astrid shrugged. "I'm okay, at least, I think. I am, thanks." Astrid gave Miss Hallström a small smile and left the room. Remy shuffled out of the school, disappointed his mom was taking him to the dentist appointment, which sucked. In fact, the whole day had sucked. Mostly it sucked because of Astrid. There was something wrong with her, something very off. Astrid hadn't raised her hand in class all day, and she seemed distracted, even self-conscious. Remy watched her from the corner of his eye, as he always did. Had seen her fuss with the pleats on her long purple-yellow dress, the one Warren had said was ugly, which it would have been if another girl had been wearing it. But everything looked good on Astrid. He'd also caught Astrid staring at the other girls in the class in a way she'd never done before. What was going on with her? Remy waited for his mom near the tall metal flagpole in front of the school, leaning towards the short brick wall at the edge of the wide sidewalk next to the school's circular drive. He watched the crowd of kids and looked for Astrid. Because she was small, it took a few minutes to find her, and he only spotted her because of heard Warren's chanting, "Astrid's a disaster." Oh my God. Remy wished he could punch the guy. He was such a jerk. Really wanted to help Astrid, but knowing that he shouldn't, Remy pushed off the brick wall and slipped through the mass of classmates who were joking around, shouting to each other or racing for the yellow bus that belched diesel fumes at the edge of the sidewalk. Still not sure what he was going to do, Remy's goal was just to get closer to Astrid. Carrying her doll was pushing her way through the crush of kids. Warren was shadowing Astrid. The jerk was also picking up gravel and throwing it on Astrid's doll and Astrid too. Crowding up behind Astrid, Warren started giving her little shoves with his shoulder. He was deliberately bumping her so she kept losing her balance. Taking several stutter steps, she tried to speed up her pace so she could get away from Warren, but he stayed with her, jostling her over and over. Warren and Astrid were walking right next to the curb at the edge of the school's driveway. Cars were pulling up to the curb, parents picking up the kids. Remy was afraid Warren was going to knock Astrid into the driveway.
I think it's gonna be the other way around, if Nexie has anything to say about it.
In front of a car. Right. Remy had to do something, he realized. He increased his pace so he could get closer. Whether Remy actually would have confronted Warren and stood up for Astrid or not, he didn't get to find out, because seconds after he headed towards Astrid, Warren lurched out into Astrid more violently, and Astrid's doll flew from Astrid's grasp. The doll dropped onto the curb and then tumbled into the driveway. Just as it did, a car pulled up and the doll disappeared behind the car's front tire. As soon as Astrid lost her doll, she came to an abrupt stop. She began looking around frantically. Warren plowed into Astrid, knocking her into a couple of kids. Astrid immediately disappeared into a 5-kid pileup, but Remy could hear Astrid's calling out, "Nexie, Nexie!" Wanting to help Astrid, Remy trotted to the edge of the driveway to grab the doll. When he reached the place where he'd seen it, though, the doll wasn't there. Several kids were now yelling at Astrid to get out of the way. She was still calling out for her doll. On the edge of the clump of kids, Warren was laughing. Remy could hear him jeering at Astrid. "Did you drop your dolly, klutz?" Warren started scanning the sidewalk. Remy was sure that if Warren spotted Astrid's doll, he'd do something cruel to it. The crowd around Astrid started to clear out, only Astrid turning in frantic circles in search of her doll, and Warren continuing to hassle Astrid remained. A continuing stream of kids heading to the buses surged around Astrid and Warren. In the chaos, no one paid any attention to the upset girl and the determined boy. Remy turned away from Astrid, Warren, and the other kids. He tried once more to find Astrid's doll. It had to be close by, Remy figured. Buddytronics could crawl, yes, but they usually didn't crawl far. Astrid's doll always stuck close to her. Where did the creepy thing go? Walking against the flow of kids leaving the school, Astrid continued to call for her doll. Warren stuck with her, making faces at her and poking her repeatedly in the shoulder as he said, "Wah, wah, the big ugly baby lost a big ugly baby." Little big ugly, whatever. That was when Remy spotted the doll. It was crouched under one of the cars at the curb. Seeing the doll's position, Remy's skin crawled. There was something sneaky about the way the doll was hunched onto its haunches, like a cat poised to pounce on an unsuspecting mouse. But no, that was crazy, Remy told himself. The doll must have just landed by accident in that position. Remy started towards the doll. In spite of how it weirded him out, he wanted to save it for Astrid. If the car it was under started moving, the doll could be crushed by the car's tire. By now, Remy noticed as he trotted towards the curb, Warren was standing right at the edge of the curb, his back to the idling cars. Warren was oblivious of the doll. He was intent on taunting Astrid, and Astrid, fully panicked, was still stumbling around looking for the doll. All the other kids were either talking or looking straight ahead, so it was only Remy who saw what happened next. It happened so quickly that Remy was still processing what he saw long after it was over. And once he processed it, he knew he was never going to tell a soul about it. There was no way he was ever going to say out loud that what he saw, Astrid's doll, leap at Warren, attach itself to Warren's pant leg, and use its teeth to rip into the meaty part of Warren's calf. But that was what Remy saw. 1 second, the doll was a lump under the car. The next second, the doll was in a full-out assault. Arms spread out, hair wild. Doll looked like an alien insectoid in terrifying attack mode. Huge teeth bared, and the doll suctioned onto Warren's leg with all 4 limbs. When it bit down on the leg and jerked its head so that it ripped away in one motion, a huge strip of Warren's jeans and an even larger chunk of Warren's flesh. Warren's scream cut through the chatter of the kids and the rumble of the buses and cars. The scream stopped everyone outside the school in their tracks. Car doors were flung open as parents jumped out to see what happened. All eyes turned towards Warren, who dropped to the sidewalk, grabbing at his leg and wailing at the top of his lungs. As much as Remy didn't like Warren, he didn't blame the guy for his reaction. Remy was close enough to see that the doll's teeth had torn deeply into Warren's leg. Remy could see a shocking wide length of bone, and blood was gushing over the sidewalk. Looking away, Remy's gaze landed on Astrid, who had finally found the doll, her face wide and her cheeks streaked with tears. Astrid had her doll wrapped in a bear hug. The doll's legs dangled limply over Astrid's belly. The doll's face was pressed into Astrid's shoulder. A couple parents and teachers converged on Warren. Remy heard several shouts of, "What happened?" Principal Mullins came rushing through the scattered kids in front of the school. He shoved his way towards Warren, and when he saw Warren's injury, the principal immediately looked around. Why would you say who did this? Call a fucking ambulance first, and then you can figure out what happened, and who, and what's. No way Remy was going to volunteer what he knew. He stayed there. He stayed where he was acting. He hoped as clueless as everyone else was.
"Looks like a bite,"
Mr. Mullins said. Squatting down next to Warren and watching another teacher put pressure on the wound, Mr. Mullins stood. "Is there a stray dog around here?" Mr. Mullins' gaze scanned the school driveway. Remy looked around too, as if he could hopefully spy the non-existent dog. He saw his mom's car and he exhaled in relief. Yeah, you can finally go to the dentist, yay. Before he walked towards his mom's car, Remy glanced at Astrid again. Still white-faced, Astrid's eyes were bulging as she turned away from Warren and the others and began walking unsteadily down the sidewalk. Did Astrid see what her doll had done? Remy wondered. He figured he'd never know because he wasn't going to ask her. In fact, he was going to do his best to forget the whole thing. He sure wasn't going to let himself remember the way the doll smiled at him when it lifted its face from Astrid's shoulder and looked back at Remy as Astrid walked away. The Pizzaplex arcade, flashing lights, boisterous crowd, and chaotic noise pressed in around Astrid and Nexie. Hand in hand, they watched Astrid's Farfar roll a ball up the ski ball's incline. The ball hopped and launched itself towards the 50-point ring. "Good one, Farfar," Astrid sang out in what she hoped sounded like genuine praise. Astrid's Farfar turned and grinned at her. When his face landed on Nexie, he frowned, but he quickly replaced the frown with another grin. Astrid obviously hadn't been able to tell her Farfar what had happened to Lexie. She'd hidden the doll's remains when her Farfar had asked why she insisted on taking Nexie everywhere. Astrid had said, "I don't want to hurt her feelings. Lexie understands." Her Farfar had patted Astrid on the shoulder. You're a kind kid, kiddo. Kiddo. Now Astrid said, You won again, Farfar? Her father gave her a quick hug.
I've won 'em all, kid. He said, are you sure you want to be here?
When Astrid's father had found out what happened at school, he'd wanted her to go to bed to rest, but she'd begged him to take her to the Pizzaplex instead. I need to do something to forget what I saw, Farfar, she said. That wasn't a lie, but she had another reason for wanting to go to the Pizzaplex, and now it was time to get on with it. Astrid nodded. It's helping me, really, she said. Her father's brow hunched, but then he asked, do you want to give it another go? Sure, she said. But first I need to go to the bathroom.
Okay, kiddo, her father said. I'll go ahead and practice while you're gone.
Astrid forced a laugh. Like you need practice, she said as she gave her father a little wave and walked away from the skee ball machine. Astrid and Nexie walked towards the restrooms. After a few steps, she glanced back and hesitated. She waited until her father returned his attention to the skee ball. Then she quickly dragged Nexie behind a row of pinball machines. What are you doing? The restrooms are the other way. Astrid bent down and whispered to Nexie. I'm going to steal a key card so we can get into the animatronics repair place. That is good, Nexie said. That is what is needed. Yes, it was. Astrid knew it now. There was no other way to make sure that Nexie didn't hurt someone else. When Astrid had seen Nexie destroy the new Bodytronic, Astrid had struggled to come to terms with Nexie's strength. It had really bothered Astrid to realize that Nexie was strong enough to completely destroy a metal endoskeleton. At that point, Astrid already knew that Nexie could be destructive, sure. Nexie had, after all, tripped Camilla. Astrid had comforted herself, though, with the thought that Nexie was just an animatronic doll with limited abilities. But then Astrid had seen what Nexie was capable of, and today she watched her doll sink her teeth into Warren's leg. Astrid hated to admit it to herself. She sure wasn't going to say it out loud, but she was becoming a little afraid of Nexie. Don't think about that, Astrid told herself. She had to focus, but how could she not think about what had happened to Warren? Over and over and over, her mind replayed the scene for her. Whether she liked it or not, Warren taunted her, Nexie disappeared, and Astrid desperate to find her. Then Astrid seeing Nexie by the curb and watching Nexie leap towards Warren and glom onto his leg. Astrid didn't want it to be real, but it was. Nexie was still acting out. Astrid had to get Nexie what she needed so she didn't act out anymore. And Astrid had to do it fast. Astrid searched for a pizza... God damn it. Astrid searched for a Pizzaplex employee. She pushed through all the happy people packed into the arcade. She just needed one. But it had to be the right kind of employee. During all her visits to the Pizzaplex, Astrid had noticed that most employees keep their keycards on lanyards that are hung around their necks. Some, though, attached their keycards to their belt loop. Astrid wanted to find those. What was his name? Tommy? From GGY do it. He also stole a keycard now. I don't remember. What about that one? Nexie asked, as if reading Astrid's mind. Nexie lifted her chin and used it to gesture towards a red-shirted employee with curly blonde hair. The keycard dangled from his belt loop. Astrid pulled Nexie along and followed the blonde employee. Please, Astrid thought silently. She had to hurry. If she took much longer, her father was going to go searching for her. Astrid pushed past a woman who wore really strong, flowery perfume. The woman's kid two kids, two little girls who looked like twins, maybe 5 years old, and both bumped into Astrid. One of them put a sticky hand on Astrid's bare arm. She quickly rubbed away what smelled like caramel. But she wasn't going to complain because the girls started squabbling. They began shoving at each other, screaming loudly, Fern, stop that! The woman scolded as the blonde employee turned towards the dark-haired girls. Astrid started around the little girls. The employee spotted Nexie and raised his eyebrow. One of the little girls bit the other one. The blonde employee took a step forward towards the girl's mother. Moving fast, Astrid slipped into the confusion and plucked the blonde employee's key card from his belt loop. Astrid quickly tucked it into the pocket of the dress and hustled herself and Nexie back to meet Farfar. When Astrid returned to him, her Farfar was just finishing a solo game. "Are you ready to try again, kiddo?" he asked when he spotted her. Astrid, feeling a flush on her cheeks, "Actually, I think I'd like to go home now." Farfar reached out and put a cool hand to her hot forehead. "Yes," he said, "I think that's a good idea. This might have been a distraction for you, but I think it was too much after what happened." "I can't believe I'm doing this," Astrid whispered 3 hours later as she and Nexie slipped through a red metal door at the end of one of the back hallways in the Pizzaplex. Astrid and Nexie stepped into a darkened concrete-floored corridor, and Astrid wondered, not for the first time, if she was doing the right thing. She was having serious doubts about it. Actually, Astrid was having doubts about everything, including herself. Since she'd been caught up in Nexie's quest to improve herself, Astrid had started examining her own face in the mirror and studying the way her dresses fit her small body. Was Astrid as wrong as Nexie's beauty opinions suggested? Astrid was starting to think so. The combination of a driving need to get Nexie a new body she wanted and Astrid's building insecurities was what had motivated Astrid to do something she never thought she'd do: steal something. Astrid felt like the keycard was burning a hole through her palm. She felt so bad about what she'd done, but then Astrid decided if she couldn't be a person who could fit in school, why not totally get into being the outcast everyone saw her as? People who stole things and broke into places were on the outside of society. Maybe that was where Astrid belonged. Astrid heard the shuffle tap of heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. A security guard. Astrid and Nexie took a sharp left and wove through several dark corridors. As she went, she kept glancing up and looking for CCTV cameras. She was doing her best to avoid them. She thought she was doing okay so far. After Astrid and her Farfar had returned from the Pizzaplex that evening, Astrid had moved on to step two of her 3-part plan to get Nexie her new body. Part 1 had been getting a keycard, and that had gone even better than Astrid had hoped it would. Part 2 had been a little trickier. After Farfar had gone to bed just before 9, as always, Astrid had used the kitchen phone to call the pot shop. Roberta had answered immediately. Astrid had launched into a complicated story about doing a school project and needing to talk to someone who worked in a repair facility and asking for directions to it in hopes that she could catch someone going in or out. Roberta hadn't even hesitated. "Sure thing, kid," she'd said, and she'd given Astrid the information she needed. Astrid couldn't believe it had been so easy. After that came part 3. of Astrid's plan. She just had to get back to the Pizzaplex before it was closed. Before it closed at 11 p.m., Astrid knew that once she and Nexie were back inside the Pizzaplex, they could hide until everyone else left. Then they could make their way to the animatronics repair facility. The bike ride from the farm to the Pizzaplex was a long one, but they made it in time. So far, so good. Astrid shivered as she and Nexie turned another corner. It was dark back there, and it was damp, cold, smelled bad, like a musty old basement. It was also loud. The hallways weren't loud in the way the Pizzaplex upstairs was loud. There was no music or laughter down here. Astrid could hear the rumble of motors and the thunk of pipes. She also heard a lot of metallic scraping. She wasn't sure what caused the scraping. That was what made it scary. The sound she and Nexie were making, the tap-tap of their footsteps, was scary too. Astrid was trying to be quiet so they wouldn't get caught, but the way every little noise echoed in the concrete metal passageways made it almost impossible to walk silently. "Calm down," Astrid commanded herself. Ever since she and Nexie had snuck out of the house to bike to the Pizzaplex, Astrid had been jumpy and tense. Everything about what she was doing made it feel like pins were poking at her all over. She didn't like lying or sneaking around, so she never did it until she had to. Astrid and Nexie reached the end of the hallway. It looked like a dead end, but Astrid knew it wasn't. She turned the corner, and there it was, just as Roberta had described. It was the door to the stairs that Roberta said led to the repair facility. The metal doorway was stained gray, and it was scarred and dented. Next to the door was a slot for a keycard. Astrid pulled out the stolen hard plastic card. She held her breath and then slid in the card. The door clicked. Astrid grabbed on the metal handle and pulled the door open. Astrid paused and took a few seconds to listen. She wanted to make sure they were alone. Astrid heard nothing. No one else was around. "Okay," Astrid whispered to Nexie. "Let's go." She gripped Nexie's hand. Together they headed down a long concrete flight of stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, they found another gray metal door. This one had no slot for a keycard. "The repair department is only open during the day," Roberta had told Astrid. "So if you want to catch someone to talk to them into letting you have a peek, you'll have to hang around between 9 and 5. The techs keep bankers hours," Roberta had snorted. "Lazy, stuck-up jerks." Come on. What's wrong with a 9 to 5? Astrid was glad the people who worked down here were lazy, stuck-up jerks. They meant they weren't here now. Astrid took a deep breath and pushed open the gray door. It squeaked and Astrid's breath caught. But when she looked past the door, all she saw was darkness. Astrid felt around on the wall next to the door. Her fingers found a switch. She flipped it. A series of overhead fluorescent lights flickered on with a few clicks and a buzzing sound. Astrid blinked at the sudden brightness. "This is exactly what we need. This is exactly what we need." God, my voice is as short as Nexie's. Nexie said, and it was. Astrid smiled, even though her legs felt weak and her heart was hammering so loudly that she could barely hear anything else. The repair facility was a long, rectangular room lined with stainless steel work tables. In spite of the fluorescent lights, the room was mottled with shadows. Half in, half out of those shadows, several endoskeletons in various stages of construction and repair lay on the tables. Above the tables, black metal shelves held row upon row of parts.
Look at that one.
Nexie pointed at an endoskeleton at the far end of the left side table.
All it needs are a few joints and a skull. You can add those.
Nexie's voice echoed in the cinder block walled room. She sounded so happy and excited. Really? Astrid looked down and smiled at her friend. Yes, I can do that, Astrid said. Astrid led Nexie towards the endoskeleton Nexie had chosen. As she went, Astrid grabbed a few tools from workbenches she passed. She also scanned the shelves and spotted joints and skull she'd need to finish the endoskeleton. She cradled everything in her arms. When they reached the particularly completed endoskeleton, Astrid laid down her tools and parts on the table as quietly as she could. The few clings of the metal parts touching the stainless steel made her tense. She immediately got to work. Less than 2 hours later, Astrid was done. She stepped back from the finished endoskeleton. What do you think? Astrid asked Nexie. Nexie studied the endoskeleton.
It is good,
she said. Then she reached into one of the big patch pockets on her dress. She pulled out the little metal scissors she'd used to show Astrid how to cut through her silk fabric skin. Because of the biting incident, Remy had missed a few days of school. His mother had kept him home because he was traumatized and needed emotional support. The whole time, Remy had hung out with his mom. He'd thought about Astrid. She was the one who probably needed emotional support. Astrid, in addition to being pretty and so smart, was a very nice girl. She must have felt awful about what her doll had done. And speaking of Astrid's doll, as Remy settled himself at his desk, he looked up to see the ghoulish doll and the gross eyeballs, the mushed together face, and the alien-looking braids coming through the classroom's doorway, as if riding on air. Of course, the doll wasn't floating. Even though Remy couldn't see Astrid behind the doll, she knew she was there. Who else would be carrying that thing into the classroom? Remy wondered how a girl as great as Astrid could have ended up with a doll so totally, completely wrong. When he'd seen the doll, Remy had wondered whether Astrid had gotten it with the intention of fixing it up. But other than repositioning its arms and legs, Astrid hadn't done anything to it. It looked the same today as it had when it had tripped Camilla and dripped its teeth into Warren's legs. Johnny tapped Remy on the shoulder, and Remy turned to look at his friend. Did you hear Warren had to get a rabies shot in case whatever bit him was a rabbit? Johnny asked. Remy ignored the shiver that rippled down his back. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, he joked. Johnny kept his voice as low as Remy's when he joked back. Maybe it was a zombie that bit him. But if he turns, he wouldn't be much different, Johnny chuckled. Remy opened his mouth to respond, but a scream stopped him. As he started to turn to see what was going on, another scream joined the first one, then another. Remy rotated completely around. His gaze landed on Astrid's doll, and then Remy's breath caught. His heart started pounding. He turned to stone. Sitting at Astrid's usual desk, a horrifying version of Astrid held her doll and looked towards the front of the classroom. What? As if it was as it should have been. But it wasn't. Oh, they didn't build an endoskeleton for Nexie. For Nexie. What happened to Astrid? His mouth hanging open, stomach churning up into his throat. Remy stared at the awfulness that used to be a special, pretty girl. He goggled at what looked like a patchwork version of Astrid. It wasn't possible, it couldn't be real. But it was. Pieces of Astrid's skin had been crudely cut apart and elongated to fit over a body that was much taller and broader than her own body had been. It was almost translucent, because it was so tauntly snug on longer hands and fingers. The skin was sewn together with ragged-looking black stitches. Astrid's face, seemingly all in one place, had been cut away from her neck. It was now expanded to cover a large skull. The blonde hair that had always been charmingly messy on Astrid's head, been smothered over the top of the skull. It had been flattened and was stiff as if it held in place with some kind of gel. Astrid's small face on the large skull resulted in stretching that widened the eyes and set them farther apart, flattened the cheeks and drew out the mouth. The face was like putty pulled out to its limit. All of Astrid's skin was pasty white, and dried blood crusted the seams that connected the pieces. Ignoring the commotion around him, Remy couldn't pull his gaze from the creature that used to be the girl he'd secretly liked. He blinked, half hoping that he was hallucinating, but he wasn't. What he was seeing, although almost impossible to take in, was real. As the collage version of Astrid sat quietly in its seat, Astrid's doll smiled contentedly. Its gaze shifted from one screaming kid to the next. It even turned and looked at Remy. He met the doll's gaze and forced himself not to cry out or run, because Remy was the only one in the class who wasn't shrieking or fleeing from the room. He was the only one who saw Astrid's stretched out mouth open. He was also the only one who heard the mumbled words that came from it. The Astrid thing hugged her doll as she said, "Perfect now." Well. God fucking damn it. That is... yeah. We don't get a lot of nice endings. I'm kind of hoping for one, though. I really was. God damn. Yeah, I don't have anything to say. Only that, oh my god, I took about 3 hours to read this. That is way too long. Such a slow speaker too. I should really work on that. Oh, my mouth is fully dried out. I'm not built for speaking 3 hours. Still, yeah. This kind of was a combination of To Be Beautiful and wasn't there another one that was like, yeah, B7, I guess. Kind of. Yeah. That's sad. Pretty sad. But it is interesting because Astrid is still conscious, right? So I guess her remnant is now infused in that new endoskeleton too. Well, I'm saying two, but Nexie. No, Nexie is probably also a remnant creature, considering she was made when the machine was bugging, which was probably the storyteller or... Wait, so is Nexie part of the mimic? Or like the virus in general? I guess so. Astrid bot. Yeah. Sad story. Pretty decent one though. Decent dish. Not my favorite, but it's good. Well, anyway, I wanted to try this once. Yeah. Video. Certainly long enough. That's for sure. I doubt anyone's gonna listen to this in its entirety. Or maybe put it on 2 times speed. Then maybe it's coherent or bearable. Anyway,